interrupt the crispy crunch breakfast with the classics with this bulletin from the WPOD News Wire. Dateline, Chicago. Detective Billibob Baddins' latest case, the death of gangster Anthony Prettyboy DeMaio, has been a tough one to keep private. But the good news is that leads are finally beginning to surface, and not on account of weights unable to hold them at the bottom of the Chicago River. A bagman, working with gangster Benny Roletto, sent Billy in search of a coat-check girl named Daphne. She attempts to stonewall Billy's investigation into a heist that Al Capone apparently arranged, but only has a rising body count and a wayward artifact from Billy's realm as the collected windfall. Much to the dwarf sleuth's chagrin, the singing sword is still on the move. And now you know the story so far. We return you to our regularly scheduled programming here on WPOD Chicago.
Chapter 10. Hitting the Books. After visiting the speakeasy, I zipped over to the office to pick up the singing sword photo. I gleaned everything I needed from it, and if I didn't return it to its rightful owners today, there would be another death. And I had a feeling it wouldn't be a pretty one. Beaten to death by a Smith & Corona is not the best way to leave the corporeal world. Ever since I walked out of the Ryerson a few days ago with the photo snug in my breast pocket, Dr. Hamill had become a regular phone pest. While Miranda knows exactly how to handle assorted press reporters, clients, and authority types over the phone, Dr. Hamill was her first ever bookworm, and he was starting to replace Capone in Miranda's book as public enemy number 1. At first, he was blunt and abrasive, as most bookworms often are. Miranda, trying to soften him up and buy me some time with the photo, made mention of her own interest in higher learning. She really knows how to play a guy. Well, the conversations got a bit longer after that. And then a bit longer. After a 1.5-hour long stretch on the phone, I heard the soft thud of a forehead against a desk, followed by, "Hey, Billy, you want to hear about the role of women during the reign of Cleopatra?" Yeah, I know. Technically, I'm a bookworm, too. And yeah, I'm blunt and abrasive to boot. But unlike Hamill and his ilk, I only read out of necessity. For these sages in training, reading is beyond any passion that a bard could write a play on. I'm not in their league. Hell, I'm not even the same sport as these academic types. Dr. Hamill must have been returning to his abrasive demeanor when I came into the office and found Miranda on the phone, nodding at what had become a reflexive action while saying things like, "Really? Legal action?" and, "Yes, I'm aware of how valuable museum property is," all the while tacking onto her bulletin board a picture of a man, well, a stick figure of a man, in glasses with Dr. Hamill penned underneath it. I watched as he drove 2 pencils deep into the heart of the sketch. If I didn't remedy this situation soon, I was afraid where the next couple of pencils would go. When I got out of the cab 20 minutes later, the sun was just beginning its daily descent in the west, the shadows of the building behind me stretching across the street towards the Ryerson like the talons of a dragon reaching for a sacrificial snack. Before the doors closed behind me, the receptionist I'd crossed battle axes with on my earlier visit was already on her feet and hustling down the corridor. Geez, doesn't that heartbeat take any time off? Guess there must have been a change in their policies on dealing with dwarves. I hadn't even reached the reception desk before I saw Dr. Hamill waving at the end of the corridor, his face bright and spectacles repaired.
"Mr. Baddins!"
He beamed, thrusting a hand out to welcome me.
"A pleasure to see you again."
"Sure, Doc," I nodded, shaking his hand. His palms were soaked. Either he was nervous about something, or he was really excited about seeing me. "I appreciate the loan of the photo. I hope you weren't too inconvenienced."
"No need to worry about it, Mr. Baddins."
He gestured down the corridor.
"Care to join me in my office? I would like to talk to you for a moment if you have the time."
"Yeah, Doc. Sure." There was something different about the good Dr. Hamill today. I couldn't read the academic from the back, but his cheeriness unnerved me. "Glad to see that your glasses were repaired," I ventured. "Hope it didn't set you back too far."
"What?
He managed a nervous titter.
Well, yes, I managed for as long as I could, but sometimes you do have to pay the piper, as it were.
What a difference in his office. His desk was much less cluttered, and the chair opposite was now cleared of the volumes that occupied it on my last visit. Hopping up in that now vacant chair, I straightened to my full height so I might catch a peek at the book he had opened this time. I was a little disappointed, for a number of reasons, that the volume was not some mammoth leather-bound tome with pages so worn and frayed that a dirty look might make its spine collapse. This time, it was a simple notebook, open to a blank page with a date. Today's date, the ink still fresh on the paper. Looked like it was going to be the good doctor's turn to ask the questions today.
So, Mr. Baddins, I would like to talk to you about...
Thanks, and you're welcome. Hamill stopped for a moment.
I'm sorry?
You didn't know me from Prince Liggermott, and you could have called the cops for stealing property like that, but you didn't. It gave me some quality time to research this enigma of yours a bit. I appreciate that, almost as much as you should appreciate my care in handling this photo and returning it intact. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh, yes.
Easy there,
well,
Doc.
No matter then, is it, Mr. Baddins? I do hope that we can... I'm so sorry. Would you care for tea or coffee? I'm just about to brew some up myself.
No, thanks. When we first met, I was barely worth the mud on his doublet. Now I was being elevated into the same company as his equals. He was offering me a place to sit, offering to brew me a cup of tea. Tea? No, I didn't have time for this superficial crap. So, Doc, what do you want? He clinked the mugs together clumsily, his coordination taking a brief holiday. Again, he laughed nervously, as bookworms often do when called to the carpet, and turned to face me.
What do you mean, Mr. Baddins?
I know crossbloods who get better treatment than I did the last time I was here.
Well, you have to understand that Miss Pendergraft is a very busy woman, and she does face quite a few questionable sorts. She tries very hard not to offend, and she has only the best intentions where the Ryerson is concerned.
Like you, Doc? As his smile started to melt like snow under dragon's breath, I took another look around. I meant to tell you, this is a nice office. Cozy. But I don't know if a guy crammed in such a tight space as this could afford new glasses so quickly. Even where I'm from, specs like yours don't come cheap. Dr. Hamill loosened his tie and took a deep breath. He was about to say something, but I wasn't going to allow him a word until I was done. You got to understand that I'm still a bit perplexed about why the cops didn't pay me a visit after I walked off with that photo. That's property of the Ryerson, and valuable property of the Ryerson at that. Then I got to thinking that maybe you didn't want the attention.
Mr. Baddins.
He had found his voice, dry as it was. By the amount he was sweating, his voice was the only thing dry about him. I pressed forward. And now I have to think why you wouldn't want that attention, unless you didn't want anyone else to know about the singing sword. Again, I paused. Builds the tension real nice. Or the other thefts you suffered here at the Ryerson.
How did...
There it was. Confirmation. Yeah, Doc, because people would ask. People would ask, who's running this show? And people would wonder why no one was asking after all these other missing artifacts, wouldn't they? They would wonder how a guy wearing frayed cuffs and hems can afford a brand new pair of glasses. Yeah, I bet you have a few other surprises in your bank account, don't you? I watched the poor sap try to brace himself against the small table with the teapot and mugs on it, his academic career now flashing by him with the speed of a human cavalry. He then dropped heavily to the floor, his body trembling so hard that he was an earthquake unto himself. I was waiting for him to burst into tears. Hopping out of my chair, I leaned in close to Hamill and locked my gaze with his. So here you are, selling priceless heirlooms on some kind of black market to the socially elite. Then, the singing sword comes across your desk. Oh, and I bet you got the offers before it ever reached Chicago. But this was going to be your ticket out of this tiny office, wasn't it? A sword of this make, found sealed in an ancient Egyptian tomb? This mystery, provided you could solve it. Could serve as your academic pass to wherever you wished. Hell, you play your cards right, you might even enjoy a dinner and cigars with old Al Einstein himself. All you need to do is crack that little mystery of the singing sword. Right?
Mr. Baddins, please, just hear me out.
He was terrified, but of exactly what remained to be seen.
I am facing difficulties in circles I travel in. While the Ryerson has been very good to me for years...
Your academic ascent has stalled a bit, hasn't it?
Exactly, Mr. Baddins. I need to win certain influences that would garner attention and patrons to the Ryerson. There is a business to what I do. It can be very...
Political? He nodded. If I kept giving him rope like this, he was going to be swinging in the breeze by tomorrow morning. And so you figured that when those new acquisitions came across your desk, you could make a few calls and supply some of Chicago's privilege with some one-of-a-kind paperweights and centerpieces in exchange for their loyalty, huh?
My intentions were to help the museum.
Don't give me that, I snarled, grabbing him by the tie and pulling him closer. The only dink you were looking out for was the one you see in the mirror. Once the singing sword arrived, you planned to shut down this racket and reform to a more respectable trade among your bookworm friends. And what better way to retire than to stash the sword away for yourself and tell your backdoor clientele that the Ryerson had been hit?
No, Mr. Baddins.
I tightened my grip on his tie, cutting him off in mid-comment. Nice way to cover your tracks, Doc. You can't be blackmailed by any of these elite types because reporting the sword's heist would bring in the press. As far as they were concerned, you just had to shut down operations for a time in order to protect them and their methods of illegally obtaining rare antiquities intended for the masses. I shoved him away, still keeping my eyes fixed on him. Then when you met me and figured out I was your key to solving the mystery, you let me get away with thievery in broad daylight. Today was going to be the day I got you out of the Ryerson and back on your academic track, wasn't it?
Mr. Baddins, please.
What?
If you would shut up and give me a chance to correct you on a point.
Now, that's what I wanted to hear. If anyone else had told me to shut up, I might have been offended. But I've been pushing this bookworm hard. It was about time he busted open. Now he was going to set me straight, which is exactly what I wanted him to do.
Mr. Baddins,
Hamill began shakily.
when I tried to win over my patrons, I did not count on any of them using my business transactions against me.
Someone putting the thumbscrews on you, then.
An interesting way to put it, Mr. Baddins, but yes, I now have a very exclusive relationship with this particular patron involving rare antiquities.
Including the singing sword.
You are right in that respect, Mr. Baddins. Just when I was starting to lose faith in this patron's supposed sway over my peers, the communique from Egypt came across my desk concerning the singing sword. I was trying very hard to keep this find outside of administrative circles here. Provided I was the only one who knew about it, my patrons would not ask. However, a find of this magnitude is hard to keep secret. The phone calls started the day it arrived, and I did my best to put them off. A few days after I catalogued the singing sword, in the presence of essential museum staff only, it went missing. The board of directors immediately convened, and I convinced them to keep the news a secret. A team in Cairo would remain there, and I knew exactly who at the Ryerson knew about the singing sword. I assured these people that if word leaked out to the press about the singing sword's disappearance, their curriculum vitae had better be in order.
Careful, Doc. I smirked. You're starting to sound like a Capone of academia. From the glare I just received, I don't think Hamill liked the comparison between himself and Capone. But he had a nice little operation going, and his people followed his orders without question. So the analogy was apt enough.
We're keeping the sword's disappearance a secret because we can't afford the bad publicity before our summer gala.
Featuring that Chicago's Who's Who list I saw on my first visit, no doubt. And this patron who had the exclusive relationship with you, I asked, how did he feel about not getting his mitts on the singing sword?
Not happy in the least.
Hamill sighed. But the good news, if I'm following you right, is that your exclusive patron couldn't do a thing about it because ratting you out would mean losing his dealer of fine acquisitions. That is something you can count on with nobility of any kind. They do love their baubles and bangles. The harder to come by the possession, the bigger the bragging rights they hold over their buddies. Dr. Hamill lacked street sense, but he was smart enough to make himself important enough not to lose. So does this exclusive patron have a name?
Absolutely not,
he said, pulling himself up to his feet.
Absolutely not, Mr. Baddings. Revealing this patron's identity would only make this mess worse, and I simply cannot afford that.
No, Doc, you can't. Just like I can't afford to tell you anything else about the singing sword. I shrugged. I tell you what, you hang on to that picture and your notes and keep on doing what you do best. And I don't mean fencing archaeological finds to Chicago's royalty. With that, I made for the door. If I need to chit-chat with you about this case, I'll give you a call. And don't you worry about me flapping my gums to anyone. As I like to say, there's a reason why I'm a private investigator. I had just touched the doorknob when I felt a sharp pain against the back of my head that sent me forward into the door, knocking my fedora into my face. Turning around, I saw the leather-bound book right before its spine clocked me in the noggin. The last time I saw that many stars, my regiment's encampment was deep in the Messina Plains. The night sky was so bright that I could read my journal at any hour I wished. As I landed among a few tall stacks of books, all of which toppled on me, I had to admit it was a pretty good hit. Hamill would have been good with a battle axe, or an ace hitter for the pirates with a swing like that. I was fading fast, but not before I heard him one last time.
As I said before, Mr. Baddings, I cannot afford this mess to get any worse.
That stinks. A strange thought to wake up to, but those two simple words screamed out what I couldn't in that moment. The smell was coming from formaldehyde, or some other kind of preservative used for specimens and acquisitions. By now, I'd remembered that I was in the Ryerson, but I knew that I was not in Hamill's office. I tried to blink, but that sent a sharp, piercing pain into my head. A souvenir from the temple strike, no doubt. I went to check and see if I was bleeding, but my hands were tied at the wrists. Apparently, the doc knew his knots, and my bonds weren't going anywhere. At this point, my eyes finally focused, and I realized exactly where I was. Or, rather more to the point, exactly what I was in. I was tied up inside what looked like an Egyptian sarcophagus. Towering over my coffin was a nearby shelf unit containing other ancient coffins from the desert regions of this world. The stacks of caskets looked uncannily similar to the final resting places of dwarven miners and builders in Acryonis, where holes were chiseled out of the stone walls in whatever location these loyal subjects of Gryphanos happened to drop. There they lie forever, a tribute of what they died to create. Egyptian royalty stacked in a warehouse like common folk. Wouldn't that bring those Tutankhamens and Nefertitis back to life in an uproar? As I gave the ropes another tug, I heard movement close by. Didn't have to take too many guesses as to who it was. Hey, Doc, you're pretty good at tying someone up. Should I ask what you're up to in your private life?
You will forgive me, Mr. Baddings, if I ignore you for a moment.
His voice filtered back in reply.
As soon as I am finished here, I will be giving you my undivided attention.
Back home, bookworms were usually the last to join up with my cross-country missions. When they did join up, they tended to stay in the back during skirmishes because they didn't like to besmirch their lily-white hands with blood. Made it a lot harder for turning the pages of their spellbooks. But this Dr. Hamill had not only sucker-punched me with the tools of his trade, but also stripped me of my jacket and shirt, leaving me with only a tank top to cover my hairy torso. I really wasn't sure why I was down to my undershirt, but considering my earlier question and the tightness of the ropes, maybe I didn't want to know. I slowly worked myself up to a sitting position, grimacing at the pounding in my head. Damn, the doc had really dealt me a hammer's blow. Now that I was upright, I could see that Hamill had his back to me, working at a table across from my private casket. He was fiddling with a syringe, mixing various vials of clear and not-so-clear potions. From where I was sitting, it looked pretty full. So, you're a bartender too? What's the cocktail you're mixing there?
Something I have been reading about.
Holding the syringe up to the light, Hamel laughed, the sound emerging as a series of high-pitched squeaks. With a slight nudge to the rubber bulb, he sent a few drops of his potion running along the length of the needle and out through the tip.
I'm not sure if you would appreciate its scientific name, so I will give you its simplified name, Truth Serum. This will allow you to relax and talk a bit.
You are just whoessa bent for leather in finding out about the singing sword, ain't you? He didn't answer. I gave another tug against my ties. The rope wasn't that heavy. All I needed was a rough surface, an edge. So, Doc, how much do you know about dwarven biology? It never really held my attention at the public library, but I understood enough to know that it's mighty different from the human variety.
Tonight, instead of adhering to scientific facts, we are, you might say, playing it by ear, Mr. Baddins,
he said, giving the syringe a few taps.
There, that should do it.
My throat felt like it was filling with sand and grit. In the next few moments, I was going to become a living witch doll. I knew that certain things in this realm didn't affect me the same way they affected humans, but there was the additional problem of the opposite being true. When I got a nasty paper cut in the office one day, Miranda insisted I dab some iodine on it to make sure I didn't get a nasty infection. Instead, I was laid up in the bed with a fever for a week because of a bad reaction to that stuff. So I tend to stay away from seafood and such, but because I'm a constant enigma with the medical types in this realm, I still don't know what will and won't set me off. Fortunately, mixed chili was A-OK for my system. That was my last passing thought before taking Hamel's needle in the arm. If I struggled, I would only make this bad situation worse. A broken needle in a vein wouldn't do much for me at the moment.
We'll start with a mild dosage, see where that gets us.
Great. I winced as he pulled the needle free. Either truth serum works fast, or a dwarven bloodstream takes to it like a Nosferatu to the darkness. I suddenly tasted salt in my mouth. A lot of salt, like overseasoned pork at the dinner table. My mouth watered, but my throat remained dry and rough. I don't know how much of that stuff the doctor pumped into me, but for a minute there, I thought I'd just downed an entire keg's worth of malt beer on my own.
Hamel.
Okay, mouth and brain not playing well with each other. Come on, Billibob, keep it together.
I think
You used plenty.
We will see, Mr. Baddins.
With that, Dr. Hamel, or at least the blurry form that could pass for Dr. Hamel, took a seat next to the sarcophagus and pulled something that bore a marked resemblance to the journal I saw on his desk earlier.
Now,
Listen to me carefully, Mr. Baddins.
Billy!
Come on, Doc.
I giggled. I was giggling? And that was just wrong.
We're pals.
Ow.
very well then.
Billy, tell me about the singing sword.
You know, the photograph you borrowed from me?
Photograph. I knew what he was asking, but I didn't really want to tell him the truth so much as I wanted to take a nap. I was having a tough time holding my head up. All of a sudden, the image of the singing sword popped into my head, clear as a spring day. My head jerked up, and I shouted it out.
Ah! A sword?
Acryonis, you mean?
Was my voice just echoing in my head, or were the acoustics in the room that good? Then I heard what I thought was steam escaping from a radiator, but it was just Hamel shushing me. Were we not alone in the museum then?
Is that its name then, Billy? The sword of...
Aaron.
Ass! I snapped.
Acryonis.
I sniggered like a pimply-faced schoolboy.
I said a naughty one, didn't I?
Don't tell Mama Baddins, Kay. She'll pan my bottom.
No need to fret, Billy.
I think he was getting slightly annoyed with me, but I warned him about the dosage. As it turned out, he'd given me all I needed, and then some.
Now then,
My turn.
We both stared at one another for a second, neither one of us expecting that to come out of me.
what?
Dr. Hamill finally managed. It's my turn. Now I was annoyed.
It's my turn to ask a question.
No fair if you're asked all questions. I could feel a fog slowly consuming my brain, no doubt the same fog that was messing with my vision. If I didn't try to fight through this ogre piss in my bloodstream, I knew I was going to be in trouble. I could hear in the doc's tone he was losing patience. Fast. Still, I wasn't loopy enough to forget I had something he wanted.
Very well, Mr. Baddins.
He conceded with a frown.
I will play your little game.
Ask me a question.
Why? Oh, okay. One more time.
Why?
Damn, this crap really made talking hard. Why am I in a sarcophagus?
You mean a sarcophagus?
Yeah. My turn.
His civil smile sobered me up a bit, but not as much as his next words did.
It's my own little tribute to you, Mr. Baddins. I've got a cable here, written by the Egyptian ambassador.
Demanding the return of this most hallowed artifact.
It's false, of course.
But I'm intending to seal you inside this casket and ship you off to Egypt so that you will be put on display in a museum of Cairo.
If you survive the journey to Egypt, perhaps they will open the sarcophagus up
And rescue you before you starve to death. But I happen to know that the curator there
is so backlogged in his work that he will be most fortunate to catalog you by May.
What, it was March now? That didn't sound so bad.
1935.
Alright, 6 years without food. Bad. 6 years without a beer. Worse.
Wow. That's a long time.
I shook my head. I'm not gonna feel so good when they find me.
Indeed, Mr. Baddins, which is why I'm going to empty this syringe into your veins once we're done.
If you're fortunate, you will slip into a coma before tomorrow morning.
Hey, thanks, Doc.
I appreciate you looking out for me.
Now, the Sword of Acryonis?
Oh, that.
I motioned with my head for him to come closer.
It's a weapon of ancient power.
A power that can only be described like... My head dropped a bit. By the fates, I was really feeling worn out.
What?
Hamill leaned in closer, his whisper matching mine.
Like what, Mr. Baddins?
Like...
Yes.
I brought my head up into his jaw with everything I had. I knew that I'd pay for it tomorrow, provided I would even see tomorrow. The pain helped me focus enough to see Hamill stumble back on the table where the syringe sat. With a groan, I pulled myself up to my feet and jumped out of the sarcophagus. When I landed, I realized that I was still lacking a bit in the coordination department. I didn't know how hard I had stunned the doc, but I didn't have time to think much about it. I slowly pulled myself up to my feet and made a break for the darkness. Whatever this place was, it was cold, dark, and completely foreign to me. I took refuge next to shelves of what looked like Roman pottery. Using my chin, I nudged a particularly large urn over the edge, shattering it against the floor. The crash provided the doc with my exact location in this warehouse, sure, but it also provided me with a shard sharp enough to start cutting the ties around my wrists. Still cutting, I continued into the shadows with the telltale footsteps of Dr. Hamill right behind.
That was a find of incredible worth you just destroyed, Mr. Baddins!
He called out in my direction. "You can bill me," I barked back, feeling the ropes start to slacken. Despite the blood rush of my escape, I still felt a bit tipsy. What few wits I kept about me led me back to the sarcophagus. I hoped the doctor, being inexperienced at handling hostages and prisoners, would have left the rest of my things there, including Beatrice. On my way there, I caught a glimpse in between the shelf units of a figure with what appeared to be a weapon in his hand. The doc wasn't serious, was he? Did he really think he could handle my girl? I was still tugging at my ties, still moving the sharp clay shard back and forth, when suddenly the ropes broke free with a dull pop. sending my wrists flying in opposite directions. One wrist went through a glass window pane of what looked like stained glass. Stained glass, the way I knew it back in the mother country. Nice to know the craft made it to this side of the portal. Broke my heart that I just destroyed it. I heard the window above me crack and finally shatter from the gunfire. The pitch of the gun was too high for Beatrice. Remaining low to the ground, I felt the holster still strapped around my calf. Empty.
Do you know how rare it is to find such samples of Tudor glasswork?
Dr. Hamill screamed from some distant part of the warehouse. Tell you what, Doc, I shouted back. How about you stop shooting and I'll stop breaking your priceless artifacts? I continued crawling toward the sarcophagus by homing in on a pair of desk lamps, the only light illuminating this dingy space. Hamill was moving a lot faster now because his long legs covered more distance than my smaller hands and knees. Reaching my coat, I felt for the shoulder holster draped over the same chair with the jacket, shirt, and tie. There she was, my girl, Beatrice. Guess the not-so-good doctor felt a little intimidated by her size. I had just slipped Beatrice free from her scabbard when Dr. Hamill emerged from the shadows, my .38 in his hand with 2 rounds left. I slowly started to back away from the table, but the click-click-click of the pistol's hammer pulling back stopped me at mid-step.
That is far enough, Mr. Baddins.
I didn't know what to keep an eye on. Hamill himself with a trembling pistol in his grasp. If it shook any harder, I thought it was going to go off on its own accord.
Place the gun at your feet.
I lowered myself, slowly, the fog of the truth serum beginning to settle in again as I did so. Placing a hand against a nearby shelf unit to steady myself, I noticed that the structure swayed ever so slightly, despite the weight of the massive coffin stacked there.
Now, get up. Slowly, Mr. Baddins.
I started to rise, but then quickly ducked into the dark side of the aisle closest to me. I think Hamill got off a shot, but I didn't hear it because I was giving a good old-fashioned dwarven battle cry as I braced my back and threw all my stockiness into the heavy-laden shells. Sure enough, I felt the whole unit go down like a giant oak tipping over after a woodman's work. I heard the doctor screaming over the sounds of sarcophagi sliding from their respective shells, and, not surprisingly, his screaming stopped when the explosion of stone hit the floor. The dust clung to the still air of this warehouse, and now the earlier smell of formaldehyde was drowned out by the combined sense of mold, decay, and time-treated corpses. Buried under several slabs of stones that once guarded the dead was a pile of ancient corpses, still wrapped in their tattered linens, and Dr. Hamill, still clutching onto my .38, with the hammer pulled back to fire that last shot. I felt the remnants of the serum still trying to make a final rally in the bottom of the night. The dust really wasn't helping to clear my head, but I had enough presence of mind to appreciate the irony of Hamill's death alongside his treasures of the past. Figured you for a mummy's boy, I quipped before everything went blurry again.
Oh, you're mine, Baddins.
Any minute now, he'd start dancing like a leprechaun.
Oh, sans be praised, and may the Blessed Mother Mary smile on me tomorrow as she's doing tonight. Ha, you're mine, freak.
The security guard heard the hoopla, guessed the first gunshot woke him up, and was on the call box to Chief O'Malley's flop in 2 snorts of a goblin's nose. I was found unconscious next to the rubble of the Ryerson's sarcophagus collection, or at least that's what the cops told me. The last thing I remember was pushing pretty hard against that wobbly shelf unit, and saying something that I thought was relatively clever. When I came to, I was in a cell, still in my filthy undershirt and slacks, under the watch of that same cookie-tossing red-headed rookie from Benny's crime scene. Still, could have been worse. I could have woken up in a sarcophagus as a featured exhibit somewhere in Egypt. Now, I was in Chief O'Malley's office, nursing a hangover unlike any I had ever felt following my regiment's all-night victory celebrations. An ice pack rested on the knot where my noggin had clocked the now-deceased Dr. Hamill. The chief could not have been happier to see me, because this time I was caught with my hand in the biscuit jar. There was no question about it. I had killed Dr. Hamill. Sure. "There's this thing called self-defense," I groaned. Damn, I wish the drummer would stop sending the war charge using my brain. "I think you'll find I didn't gun that bookworm down in cold blood."
You're no weaseling your way out of this one, circus freak. I got you dead to rights. You killed that doctor after you stealing and destroying property at that Ryerson.
Did someone write that motive up for you, O'Malley? Or did your boys at the crime scene trip through this one as they tripped through Benny Roletto's? The chief was about to launch into the riot act, but I spoke up before he uttered a sound. The good Dr. Hamill was about to seal me up and have me impersonate King Tut. He was filling me with something called truth serum, and to tell you the truth, it's given me one beauty of a hangover.
So, you two are taking it in the arm together when you shot him because you were as eye as a gite.
This Mick couldn't be that stupid. O'Malley, if you notice something, he wasn't shot. In fact, he was shooting at me with my piece.
You caught a plant at that.
Doesn't give it up easily, does he? No, O'Malley, I didn't plant my gun on him. I planted a couple of stone coffins on top of him because he was trying to kill me.
Oh, confession. Just what I was...
The door to his office flew open, and in walked a gentleman dressed in a sharp-looking, expensive suit, his hair slicked back as if expecting to be in O'Malley's office at 12:14 a.m. As he handed his card to O'Malley, he gave me a nod of reassurance.
"This interview with my client is over."
O'Malley went pale at reading the name on the bone ivory card in his hand.
The circus freak is your client.
Mr. Baddins is one of many clients I keep an eye on, and I will not have you degrading him with such slurs. If this treatment reoccurs, I will...
O'Malley slapped the card on his desk and stood nose to nose with his slick suit, as I like to call the barristers of this realm, spraying the guy with his spittle as he ranted.
Now wait just a minute, your fancy pants boyo. I got a confession out of him just a moment ago.
Out of duress from the looks of him.
This guy wasn't conceding an inch. This slick suit had orc blood in his veins.
And as his attorney was not present for this interview, he was not advised properly as to what questions were appropriate to answer, considering the circumstances.
There's a dead man in the morgue tonight because of him.
The slick suit smiled politely and walked around O'Malley to stop at the chief's desk.
According to your police reports,
he continued calmly, opening his case and producing several documents that joined his business card.
There was evidence of a syringe containing traces of a mixture of barbiturates that my client could still very well be under the influence of.
I can assure you, counselor, I grunted, shifting my ice pack from the back of my head to my forehead. I am. Sharp as a broadsword, well-informed, prepared for any sliders from O'Malley's mound. Who the hell was this guy?
Considering the influence of said drugs that Dr. Hamill was administering, and my client's current physical state, do you seriously believe that his confession would hold up before a grand jury? If you submit this confession to the DA's office, I will have you laughed out of the courthouse and this precinct.
He then fastened the clap on his briefcase and sighed heavily.
Do you really want a second black mark by your name, Chief O'Malley?
Damn, this guy's got a set. I turned my attention to O'Malley, expecting him to be deep in the throes of a demonic possession as cast by Ressican necromancers. I had a feeling I was going to be treated to the main event between Mad Irishman O'Malley and El Boyo de Slicko going the distance over little old me. But damn all the luck, O'Malley was throwing in the towel. His shoulders dropped and his skin continued to flush in color. His Irish eyes weren't smiling, that's for sure.
Please return Mr. Baddings' possessions immediately, or else we assure you that your poor handling of this delicate matter will reach tomorrow's papers.
Hey, pal, I thought in a panic through my head's incessant pounding. Don't tempt the fates. I know you got a set that would make a valley giant envious. Now let's get my things and scram. I really didn't think this could get any weirder, but it did. O'Malley looked at me, swallowed hard, and said,
Sorry to have convenienced you, Mr. Baddins. I'll have your things in a moment.
Okay, that settled it. I was dead. The whole thing with covering the doctor in the sarcophagi, waking up in a jail cell, and this meeting with O'Malley was my final test. I could now walk out of the precinct headquarters and accept my estate upon the everlasting fields.
Mr. Baddings?
My newfound attorney spoke.
If you will follow me?
I hopped out of my chair, hissing slightly at how much I hurt. This was definitely an all-over hangover I was suffering. At that moment, a uniform showed up with my stuff. My shirt, jacket, fedora, and arsenal. I followed the mystery slick suit to the double doors of the precinct, where I slipped on the jacket and wrapped up my pieces, in their respective holsters, in my shirt. Look, pal, I know it's late, but thanks. I put on my fedora. I don't mean to question the fates, but who the hell are you? Again, he produced a bone ivory card and handed it to me.
Michael Ahern, attorney at law, and you're most welcome, but you should also thank my employer the next time you see him. The driver will see you home.
He motioned to the waiting car. Even through the blinding headache I was carrying away with me, I still recognized that particular car at a glance. It was the same car that had delivered me to my private audience with Al Capone.